You're 41,000 feet above the ground, in a plane the size of an apartment building, when both engines go silent at once. Not a stutter, not a warning. Total silence, in a machine never built to fly without power. This isn't a movie. This happened on a summer evening in 1983 to 69 people who had no idea their pilot was about to make aviation history. Captain Bob Pearson had flown for more than 15,000 hours. He'd handled emergencies before. But nothing in his training had prepared him for what his own airplane was about to do to him. Air Canada Flight 143 left Montreal on the evening of July 23rd, bound for Edmonton, with a stop in Ottawa. It was a brand new Boeing 767, one of the first Air Canada had ever flown. And like most new aircraft, it came with problems nobody had fully worked out yet. Here's what nobody on board knew. Weeks earlier, Canada had officially switched its aviation industry from imperial measurements to metric. Somewhere in that transition, a fuel calculation went badly wrong. The ground crew believed they had loaded enough fuel for the full trip. In reality, they'd loaded less than half of what was needed. Nobody caught the error. The mistake slipped past every safety check built specifically to catch mistakes like this one. Flight 143 climbed to cruising altitude, and for a while, everything felt completely routine. Then, at 41,000 feet, a warning light lit up in the cockpit. A fuel pressure problem on the left side. Strange, but not yet alarming. Pearson and his first officer, Maurice Quintal, decided to divert toward Winnipeg, the nearest major airport, just in case. Minutes later, the left engine died. Then, almost immediately after, so did the right one. A Boeing 767 is not built to glide. And yet, at that exact moment, over the skies of Manitoba, that's precisely what it was forced to become. 69 people, sitting inside a 132-ton aircraft with zero engine power and no precedent for what should happen next. Here's where the story turns from a disaster into something almost impossible to believe. Captain Pearson had a hobby most of his passengers had no idea about. In his spare time, he flew gliders, small, engineless aircraft that ride entirely on air currents. Almost no commercial airline pilot has any real reason to practice that skill. Pearson happened to have it anyway. Using instincts built from years of glider flying, Pearson began calculating something with no standard formula in any pilot's handbook. How far can an unpowered 767 actually glide? He and Quintal quickly realized they weren't going to make it to Winnipeg. Too far. And the aircraft was losing altitude too fast. That's when Quintal remembered something from his own past. Years earlier, before becoming a commercial pilot, he'd served in the military and trained at a small airfield called Gimli. It had since been decommissioned. No air traffic control, no emergency crews standing by. But it had a runway, close enough to reach. Neither pilot knew Gimli's old runway had been converted into a racetrack, actively in use that very evening, with cars and campers parked along its length. Pearson brought the aircraft in far too high and too fast. So he did something almost no commercial pilot does in a passenger jet. He put the plane into a side slip, turning the fuselage sideways against the airflow to bleed off speed fast, a technique borrowed from glider flying, never performed before in a commercial airliner this size. It worked. The aircraft dropped fast enough to line up with the runway. The landing gear came down, but the front wheel refused to lock into place. As the plane touched down, the nose gear collapsed, and sparks tore down the runway as the aircraft screeched to a stop, just short of the people and vehicles gathered along the old racetrack. All 69 people on board survived. Investigators later traced the failure back to that one metric conversion error, a miscalculation that slipped past every layer of redundancy built to prevent exactly this kind of catastrophe. But what saved everyone on that flight wasn't a redundancy system. It was two men whose personal histories happened to intersect with the exact skills that emergency required. A hobby glider pilot, a former airman who remembered an old, forgotten runway. Pearson and Quintal were later awarded the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale's diploma for outstanding airmanship, an honor given to only two pilots in the world each year. They were its first recipients. The aircraft became known as the Gimli glider, and it kept flying passengers for another 25 years after that night. You're 41,000 feet above the ground when both engines go silent. It sounds like the end of the story. For 69 people on a July evening in 1983, it was only the beginning of the part nobody could have predicted.